I'm Amy Summers with Restore Health Consulting. I just wanted to have a conversation that it seems like everyone's talking about in the 503A space. I was just curious what prompted you to speak up now.
Peptides have given a lot of people their life back. The success that they've had with using peptides, the fact that they are having to source them on the gray market right now because there is no legal pathway, there's a significant concern around where these come from.
Meet Melissa Stefko, Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Wells Pharmacy Network and board member at the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding. On the front lines of the fight to keep peptide therapies safe and accessible before FDA's pivotal July vote.
From a patient safety perspective, what's the difference between if you could get a peptide from a pharmacy that has to follow those 503A regulatory standards versus something obtained from some gray market online source?
The way I kind of put it to people is think about somebody making this in their garage. You got to think worst case scenario here because we don't know. There isn't potency testing. I can't get a sterility report. They're not testing it for endotoxin. I think that the concern should be around the compounding process and the sourcing process, right? So vendors, obviously the manufacturers of the peptides, that matters. I think we can create a space with some guardrails that allow for these to be compounded where FDA is comfortable.
Obviously a major concern when you've got a legitimate pharmacy access that's now disappeared overnight. Why do you think pharmacies may be hesitant to share data that they might actually have, even when this data could help the whole industry?
We're just at a really pivotal point here.
Okay, welcome. I'm Amy Summers with Restore Health Consulting, and I have Melissa Stefko of Wells with me here today. And I just wanted to have a conversation that it seems like everyone's talking about in the 503A space, so I thought we could just get into it. And so thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having.
Yeah. So what actually prompted our discussion today was you posted something on LinkedIn about peptides and basically that upcoming FDA discussion. And so I was just curious what prompted you to speak up now.
Yeah, so we have the upcoming FDA PCAC meeting toward the end of July, and we're looking for additional information from the industry and from doctors on the peptides that are looking to be evaluated. So I was reaching out to the community to see if there's anything that anybody had that they would be able to provide, or if they were willing to share any anecdotal evidence, any data, obviously redacted data. We don't want any patient information, but just sort of general demographic information so that we have more sort of information to provide FDA when we get there and to really bolster the message of that this is really widely needed in the industry. There was a market for it previously. It's shifted to the gray market, which we all know is very unsafe. So we're just looking to collect as much data as possible so that we can all move forward as an industry in the right way.
Awesome. Have you had any feedback since that post? Has anyone reached out?
I've had a couple, haven't gotten a lot of meaningful data as of yet. It's more so people wanting to interact, to learn more about the PCAC meeting and the process and that sort of thing, which I'm happy to discuss, but it hasn't led to much of getting more information. I have taken a look a little bit at the docket because FDA is also calling for public information. So I have looked a little bit at the docket and some people have provided some information in there. So probably my next post will be leading people to the docket directly.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of questions for you and we'll probably touch on a lot of what you just talked about. And just go a little bit deeper. But before we get into the technical and like the regulatory details, can you explain for anyone who doesn't know why this topic matters?
Yeah, so it matters because peptides are naturally occurring in the body, right? So a lot of things we're moving towards, and I think this shift has been happening for quite some time, like certainly more than a decade. We've been moving towards personalized medicine. People want to be healed from the inside out instead of just treating the symptoms. I think with technology expanding and social media and things, I think the lay people are learning a lot more about the drug approval process and some constrictions around that. I've seen a post about Whitney Houston's song, I Will Always Love You, is older than women being included in clinical trials. So, I think that people are getting some tangible knowledge now and kind of understanding that it's not a one size fits all. Like personalized medicine, there is a space for it and there's a need for it, especially I think in situations like that, like with women. So I think this is kind of a little bit peptide-y, but also a little bit on the side of, we really want to be able to control our therapies. It should be between the patient and the doctor. So it's a little bit of both, but I think that peptides are getting a lot more traction because of, in the media, at least because of a lot of influencers use it. There's a lot of talk about RFK Jr. He's been on podcasts talking about it. I think we've seen recently somebody in the White House has taken, one of the compassionate care route to getting some medication through Eli Lilly, which is also peptide. So I think that people are understanding a little bit more about what this means as an industry from a legal perspective, from a regulatory perspective, political perspective, but also like the peptides themselves have given a lot of people their life back. I think anecdotally, we've heard quite a bit in the industry and even just in my community amongst my friends, and none of them are, bodybuilders or anything like that. It's just normal people. They're normal, like neighbors, people that you see, out at the grocery store. And the success that they've had with using peptides and the fact that they are having to source them on the gray market right now because there is no legal pathway. And although there wasn't a legal pathway previously, FDA did indicate in their case with TaylorMade that they would not take enforcement action had the product been nominated. So that was kind of the legal pathway compounders were working with before 2023. And so a lot of people were able to access it back then. And then it's made this shift into, not being able to access through a prescription anymore. Now they're going to the gray market, which is,
Yeah.
I've seen it sold on Amazon. I've seen these places pop up like Peptide Sciences, which just recently closed. And you can't find these places. I mean, their address on their website is to either like a mailing station or a virtual office or things like that. So there's a significant concern around where these come from, what's happening, how they're made, how they're stored, how they're tested, all of these different things that I think a lot of people didn't truly understand while they were taking it. So I think this is where it's kind of it's come to a head. Like we've got to decide, as a country, do we want our people to be exploring these other pathways that are easily accessible or something that can be a little bit more controlled in terms of making a product that is under some regulation that supports quality and safety?
100%. You said you were talking a little bit about nominations, and I don't know if this is okay to bring up, but as I understand it, Wells was involved in nominating some of these peptides years ago. And so when those nominations were submitted, what kinds of clinical uses were you or the pharmacy seeing in practice?
So they were different across the board. The majority of, so for example, BPC, we all know is a great anti-inflammatory. A lot of people use that for muscle or tendon recovery. So this is widely used in sprains, tendinitis, those are sort of the indications that we were seeing previously. And personally, I've used it for that as well, and saw great success with that. AFRM has talked quite a bit about different indications for them. So we explored, as a company, we explored all the different indications. We talked with providers in the industry and other experts, AFRM, IPS, International Peptide Society, across the board to see what's going to make sense us as an industry to nominate these items for. Because, one thing we don't want to do is just nominate it for one indication like insomnia, which, yes, it's a potential help for that. But there's also plenty of medication on the market that's commercially available for that indication. So we're not here to compete with any of that. We're here to get into this space where pharma is falling short and fill the gap where people are unable to access things that work for them for things that commercial products cannot work for them.
It seems like there's a potential disconnect between how some of the peptides have been clinically used versus how certain ones are appearing in this evaluation. you talked about BPC, for example. So what are you seeing there?
So I did go back and review because I was really surprised when I saw BPC. I think on the PCAC agenda, it says for ulcerative colitis, which is great because it's naturally occurring in your digestive tract already. So yes, that makes sense because it's an anti-inflammatory. But what we've widely seen it for, and for the other indications that we provided, that was one of many that we provided. And that's the only one that's under evaluation. So I'm not really sure what happened, if there's a disconnect between transferring over what was nominated to
Okay.
the website, if there's enough information or enough space to put all the indications on there. So I'm not really clear on that. I'm interested to see how FDA evaluates that because it isn't for one indication. And I think a lot of people
Right.
know in the industry, BPC has been more widely used for muscle recovery than anything else. So I'm interested to see how that kind of plays out.
I think hot off the press from yesterday, you had FDA recommending, or at least their initial evaluation was to recommend not adding them to the bulks list. So do you think that compounders and prescribers have done enough to clearly document their, real world use case for these types of substances?
I mean, we can always do more, right? I know FDA has safety concerns in mind due to lack of data, but these are no different than the vitamins that we're injecting and the different things that they're all naturally occurring in our body, right? So these are just synthetic versions of that. I think that the concern should be around the compounding process and the sourcing process, right? So vendors, obviously, the manufacturers of the peptides, that matters. And I think we can create a space where it's sort of like what they did with the green list for GLPs. I think we can create a space with some guardrails that allow for these to be compounded where FDA is comfortable. But what I did see, what was really interesting, is the PCAC roster, the member roster that was also updated. And it looks very heavy on people that widely support peptide therapy. So it'll be an interesting sort of dynamic, and this
Yeah,
sort of where RFK Jr. is saying we really need these, FDA is saying we don't really think that this is a good idea, and now we've got PCAC that's very influential in the peptide space. So I'm interested. This is going to be. I'm getting my popcorn ready.
for sure. I'm just wondering, like, what kind of information would be useful right now for those that are making those submissions or comments rather to the docket. For me, I would be personally interested if a prescriber can, explain with real data, maybe not, telling a patient's name or any of that stuff, but to, show with data like, hey, I've seen 1,000 patients because they failed everything else or whatever, what have you, and I'm getting good success with, these markers, and we have, clinical data. But what do you think would be most helpful? Should this information be coming just from pharmacies submitting their data, or do you think there should be prescribers being called to action, patients themselves standing up to explain their case?
Yeah, I think patients and physicians would be very important to enter the conversation here because we need the anecdotal we need the story. We need the story on, I mean, I've spoken to many physicians at a FACERM conference, and many of them are still prescribing it, regardless of whether they're sending people for research grade or not. They fully believe in these products and they believe in the therapy and have seen the success so that they're willing to take the risk of their patients
Wow.
taking research grade products because they know that there isn't anything else out there for them that is going to work, or they've exhausted all other therapies. And this is something that they're willing to give a try. And I think at AFRM I think in May, was the largest turnout for the peptide modules that they had seen. So more and more physicians are getting on board with this personalized medicine, with this sort of, I don't want to call it a new age because that's had kind of a negative connotation in the past, but this
Yeah.
new sort of pathway of healing from within. And I think a lot of people are on board with that and they really want to be able to access these. So having the physicians and the patients sort of advocate for themselves. Compounding pharmacies can only go so far. We can talk about what we can do, what makes sense for us, but from a perspective of FDA, we're benefiting from the financial gain as well. So for these doctors and patients that are benefiting more from the therapeutic gain, like I think that speaks louder than what compounders have to offer.
You were just talking about the gray market and how I think, if I'm going to frame it right, that there's obviously a major concern when you've got a legitimate pharmacy access that's now disappeared overnight. Clinicians are then and patients are then finding an alternate source to go elsewhere. This is what happened. This is what we're seeing. So from a patient safety perspective, what's the difference between, if you could get a peptide from a pharmacy that has to follow those 503A regulatory standards versus something obtained from some gray market online source?
Yeah. So from what I've seen on the sort of research grade gray market, so their caveat that they have put on their website is this is not for human use. This is for research only. We know that's not happening, especially on the website when they're giving directions on how to inject and how much to inject and adding the bacteriostatic water to reconstitute a product. So I think that the gig is up. FDA has obviously found a few of them and have targeted them a little bit in the warning letters and putting out that information, but it's not enough. So people aren't understanding. The way I kind of put it to people is think about somebody making this in their garage, because you got to think worst case scenario here, because we don't know. They could be just making this in their garage. It's not tested for sterility. It's not tested. I've reached out to a few through like my personal email and asked for, what could you provide me if I order this? And really it's the C of A of just the molecule itself. There isn't potency testing. I can't get a sterility report. They're not testing it for endotoxin, all things that compounders are required to be able to do, especially under USP 797. So I think that people are at a large risk here of getting something that's not sterile, something that could be potentially counterfeit, that could be something a lot more egregious, that, something, an allergy is a huge concern as well. There's a lot of concerns around this because of the unknown. It's just not clear what they really are. And they're not providing the information. I can go on Amazon and see that they'll sell BPC 157 injectable on Amazon and you can just order it. So
It's crazy.
I think it's wild that, we're here, but this is where we are in 2026. And I would like to, and I think everyone in the industry would like to create a pathway where people can get to this, where it's safe. It's tested for sterility. It's tested for endotoxin. There's a potency profile. There are guardrails around the compounding of it. It's, governed by FDA and state boards of pharmacy. And so you have that sort of warm and fuzzy feeling that, the same things that you would get, such as a compounded testosterone vial or progesterone vial or anything like that, would be, of similar sort of manufacturing quality that you would get with a peptide in terms of what would happen inside the manufacturing process.
Yeah, if only they could make it. You have been very open that pharmacies can face real enforcement consequences in this space. And I think you know what I mean. So what should compounders understand about the difference between federal enforcement discretion versus any state board action?
Yeah, so 503As are typically governed by the state boards of pharmacy. 503B is more FDA regulated, but they are still governed by the board of pharmacy. So FDA does have an oversight piece in the 503A, but it's not as well, it's not the first layer of regulatory for a 503A, which is where these peptides would be compounded. So in that, if FDA says, we're not going to take enforcement action on this, but we're not going to put it on the approved folks list now or codify it in a CFR as, something that they can forever compound, it's still up to the state boards at that point, whether or not you can compound it and send it into those states. This is just step one, and there's many ways it can go. So really, if FDA doesn't plan to take enforcement action, that doesn't necessarily mean state boards won't. And that's the disconnect between state and federal at the moment.
Are you seeing even right now there's certain states that might allow some of these peptides?
I think there are more states that are more liberal toward it, that are very much want to defer to FDA and will follow whatever FDA kind of says. But there are states out there that govern themselves and they're in their bubble and they don't want any sort of outside influence. So unless it appears on that category 1 of the bulks list, it's a no-go for them. And even if it moves to category 1, it's still up for interpretation for the state as well. So because we've seen things go on category 1 in states like California that are still not allowed to be compounded in California. So
kind of taking a turn back to a few things we were talking about a minute ago, why do you think pharmacies may be hesitant to share data that they might actually have, even when this data could help the whole industry? And I think it ties into that enforcement and all of that.
So it's very anonymized, the data that at least we're collecting as an industry. We're looking for data in terms of how many units have been out there, how many males between 30 and 40 are getting EPC versus alternatives, just so that the FDA can see that this is what we were doing prior to 2023 when that shift was made for the peptides onto category 2. This is what we were seeing. This amount has shifted now to the gray market, or essentially the black market, if you really want to go that far, because now people are going to continue to get it regardless of, what the law says. So I think that it's just we're at a pivotal point here. We really need to be able to provide enough information for the agency to look at that'll be meaningful so they can kind of see that correlation. And it is anonymized. Nobody wants to hand it over and say, hey, these people did it beyond 2023 and they're still currently doing it today. Nobody wants that. What we want to do is show as an industry, until it was placed on category 2, here's what people were doing and what they were taking. And there's a strong correlation, if not all, potentially even more people are now shifting over to these research grade materials.
You keep saying we as an industry are gathering the data, and I'm just wondering if all of those 503As are with your group, or if there's something, some independent 503A has data, but they don't know where to, give it. So I guess my question is, how can even those kinds of independents share data with who? Is it with you guys? Is it where should they go?
So it goes through the Outsourcing Facility Association, OFA, through Lee Rosebush's group. If they're a member of APC, Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, they have also sent out an email of how to get the information over to their group as well. And then people can reach out to me to ask for questions on how to get information over as well. I'm happy to help guide them. But it is through a secure website, through a law firm. So it's protected information.
I see.
And so it would be, all anonymized, and we're not sharing between each other, although many of us have been very open about who's been doing what in the industry, just because I always felt that working together, we're going to get much more. There's plenty of, business to go around. So,
yeah. No, it's good, I think, for an industry to unite. I think that's pretty usual. For someone listening to this and they've never followed a PCAC meeting or an FDA docket before, what do you think they should be understanding about this moment?
Well, like I said before, this is very pivotal in our industry. I think this is pivotal in terms of medicine and taking back, sort of our therapies into our own hands. It should be between the doctor and the patient, and at times with the pharmacist as well. People should have access to the medications and therapies that they know work for them. And like I said, we just saw it within the White House itself. There's a compassionate care program for a reason, and people having access to things that are not FDA approved. And that shouldn't be limited to the White House. It should be for all. I think that, this is a very interesting time, and there's a lot more to it than just these peptides alone.
Yeah.
A turn in personalized medicine.
So for everyday stakeholders like pharmacists and prescribers and patients or other professionals, can they somehow participate in this meeting, or can they somehow make their voices heard?
Yep. So there is a federal docket asking for comments, and I think that closes July 9th. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that closes July 9th. So you can submit, and you can see what everyone else has submitted too. So don't be afraid getting on there and you feel a little bit intimidated submitting something to the government. You can see what everyone else has submitted. and kind of use those as a template if you wanted to. But there is that piece. You can join the PCAC meeting either in person or virtually. They will be doing it virtually as well. There won't be any speaking opportunities. That door closed last night for people to submit to do any speaking opportunities. There's only, I think, 10 minutes throughout the whole thing. And I think there's 15 people that are speaking. So,
Ooh.
yeah, kind of shuffling it around a little bit, trying to get on the same page. And if who's speaking, making sure we're not repeating the same thing. So, audience is just an audience. There's no participation from the audience in this case. So, I highly recommend that people join virtually to not overcrowd the room. I think there's going to be quite a bit of attention at the FDA site anyway. But join virtually to see kind of how this process is, kind of how it's broken down. And at least what we've seen previously is FDA gets kind of this unlimited amount of time to defend how much they
Okay.
don't want something. And
Okay.
then 10 minutes given to the industry and then PCAC votes. So I think it's really interesting, and it's something that people need to see to kind of understand how the politics of this is working.
You're right. The July 9th date is where, as I understand, pharmacists, patients, any other stakeholders, they can make their whatever I'm trying to say here, comment. Yes. And then I think PCAT can actually like review that beforehand. And then if you submit it between July 9th and the 22nd, I think the 22nd's the cutoff, but they may not hear it or see it, before they meet. But what would you love to see submitted? In these comments, like I personally, I don't find it helpful if a comment is like, yes, put them on and have no basis for their opinion. I personally would like to see, science-based, data-driven type of defense, either for it or against it. Like I would like to see that personally. How about you?
The same. I think that the more information that we have, the more, since these haven't gone through clinical trials and we haven't seen scientific studies on these, we're heavily relying on anecdotal, and having physicians come in and talk about their peptide protocols that they provide and the therapies that they provide, the success that they've seen versus commercial pathways. I think it's very important for PCAC to hear that, and to hear that there is a place for this in the industry in weighing out the risk versus the benefit here. The risk of either going to the gray market where we don't know where these things are made or how they're made or anything about them, to where it's a lot more controlled and it's understood. It's well understood what's being done in a compounder. So just those anecdotal sort of evidence, any scientific data that is out there that has potentially been missed. I think we have quite a bit, but there's always something that potentially could be out there that somebody's unaware of. But I think that just getting in there and discussing, for 10 years, I've been providing this for my patients, and I had to move them to the gray market because I believe so heavily in this, that the risk benefit ratio pushed me in that direction, that I had to do research grade because my patients couldn't be without their therapy.
Incredible. I guess my other question is, what are the possible paths from here? So you have, the PCAC meeting, they'll vote, FDA will then review that and, eventually make their interpretation or opinion. But what kind of path do you see happening? I think there's a few options.
Yeah, it's really tough to tell at this stage. Things are still moving every day. I would say before a few weeks ago, there's a couple pathways, right? So they could move it to category 1, which would override the policy in which they had starting in January, where they were no longer shifting things around on the bulks list.
Yeah.
Either it's approved or it's not approved. So it could go that direction with maybe, and I'm not really sure how it would work, a draft guidance of some sort of how you can make them. It could go where they do get codified and put into the CFR, and forever compounders are able to make it, which would, protect those peptides from, administration changes and different thinkings of when FDA makes those shifts with different administrations. They could just say no. I'm really interested to see how it goes. I'm really not sure. I don't think anybody is fully sure. We've had a lot of talks with people that have been dealing with FDA. They're not really sure, it sounds like. So I think we're all kind of in it together just to figure out what's going to work best for the patients. and what that looks like in a sort of a legal pathway. It's hard to tell at this stage.
You mentioned that one of the pathways could be where FDA codifies it. Are you saying that that would be like the final bulks list versus the interim category 1 placement?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. What worries you most if the industry stays quiet or fragmented?
That we just remain, what we are and not allowing for any sort of innovation to fill the gap between what's commercially available and what people are going to get out on the street regardless. I think that it's a very unsafe territory. I think we've heard of a lot of issues and adverse events that people have had with the gray market material. I think it's fair, and I do think we owe it to the country to provide, guardrails around that and to have it in a safer setting that is regulated. If we don't speak up, if we don't get out there and sort of rally, I mean, no movement's going to be made, and we'll be stuck sort of in this where we're going to continue to see people get hurt. And nobody wants that at the end of the day. Nobody wants that. People want to have safe sort of medication that they can take that they know that works.
So ahead of July 9th, and I think you've just said it, but for the pharmacist, the prescriber, the patient, other stakeholders out there, the thing to do this week, what is that thing that they should be doing this week?
Head to the FDA docket. I believe it's regulations.gov.
Yeah.
So, and then you can search on there the peptides, and you can take a look at everything that people have been saying. We've gotten a lot of really great comments on there, but more is always better in terms of data and different things that we can provide. Like you said, it's not helpful when somebody pops in and says, yes, please approve. That we're not looking for anything like that. We're looking for valid scientific data and anecdotal data, anything that, even patient sort of stories or testimonies about how it's changed their life. I mean, me personally, when I tore my Achilles tendon and was able to walk 4 days later after injecting PPC, that's just really unheard of. And I have a friend that is an orthopedic surgeon that I've talked to about this, and it blows their mind. It should be available to people that want to be able to take it.
That's a powerful anecdote. That's the kind of thing that I'd be curious about, even if it's not like, what we'd like to see, the double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. But if you're just an N of one, a patient who's had some issue and the typical channels couldn't solve it, and so you try something new and you had some clinical benefit, I mean, I would like to hear about that personally.
The drug pathway isn't without flaws itself, right? Like, how many drugs have been removed from the market after they've been deemed safe for so many years, after going through all the trials and all the different pathways? So there isn't a system that works that is very robust, in my opinion.
Okay. Any final message you want to leave the compounders with, the patients with, who are trying to navigate this responsibly?
Yeah. Tune in on July 23rd and July 24th, see kind of how everything pans out. Highly recommend getting involved in advocacy agencies in the industry, such as APC. You get a lot of really great information through them, and you can stay up to date on every single little regulatory movement in the industry. So it's really important that we all work together to get this accomplished.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation and talking to you about this and learning some things I had no idea about, some of these peptides. So thank you for talking with me. And listeners, thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.